serious cardiological problem in Gehazi. And it's a story that speaks to us today. Now Naaman, captain of the host, the Bible says, host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. Like Cyrus after him, God could say of this heathen general, I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me. Any success saint or sinner has comes from God. In every area of life, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. Josephus tells us how Naaman gave deliverance to Syria and became a great man. He states, Naaman was the certain man who drew a bow at a venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness, resulting in the death of Ahab. Ellen White hints at this in the book Prophets and Kings. His deadly aim was not simply a lucky shot on a lucky day, for the verse continues, he was also a mighty man of valor. He had the world by the tail. Everything was going well. He was successful, popular, and wealthy. But if the story quit there would be no story. Naaman would have become simply one of the countless unknowns who have lived, who have died. His grave would be lost, his name forgotten. There would not be a trace of him. All his past success would mean nothing today. Worldly fame and prosperity is fleeting. As counterintuitive as it might seem, it was Naaman's medical problems that brought him a lasting legacy with one of the great classic stories of the ancient world. Now, I'm not able to tell you whether Elisha violated federal HIPAA laws in recording the story. But after telling of Naaman's valor, Elisha adds, he was a leper. And leprosy was both incurable and deadly. Naaman could conquer the enemies of Syria without, but he couldn't conquer the enemy within. Here, as in so many areas of life, fame and fortune mean nothing. So often we look at life backward. Naaman thought his leprosy was a tragedy. His wife thought it was a tragedy. The king of Syria thought it was a tragedy. But that leprosy was to bring Naaman the greatest lesson and blessing of his life. God's aim in all the experiences he allows us to go through is spiritual cleansing. I like how it's put in manuscript 157, 1899. Holiness is the end of all God's dealings with us. Ministry of Healing tells us in the future life, the mysteries that here have annoyed and disappointed us will be made plain. We shall see that our seemingly unanswered prayers and disappointed hopes have been among our greatest blessings. Education tells us Christ will work through those who can see mercy in misery and gain in loss. When the light of the world passes by, privilege will be discerned in hardship, order in confusion, success in apparent failure. Calamities will be seen as, read it with me, disguised blessings. Woes as mercies. And it's lost contact again for some reason. The Syrians and the Israelites were in a state of war. Naaman's leprosy did not make him slacken his warfare against the Israelites. And the Syrians had gone out by companies. They stole, they pillaged, they robbed, raped, and murdered. The Israelites were crying out to God for him to raise up and destroy the Syrians and deliver his people. They were looking for God to provide a hero soldier, a Joshua, a Gideon, a Jephthah, to lead his people to victory. But God had another plan. A plan to bypass the Syrians' prejudice. Testimonies to Ministers, page 300 says, God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that he is taking the reins in his own hands. The workers will be surprised by the simple means that he will use to bring about and perfect his work of righteousness. The simple means God used to surprise Israel was a kidnapped slave. Like Naaman's leprosy, her capture appeared to be a great tragedy. We don't know her age. Hebrew expression in the passage could mean the youngest daughter. She would have been unmarried, but could have been of marriageable age. Perhaps she was a teenager. The Hebrew word translated little could be emphasizing her size. She was petite, she was small. Or it could be emphasizing her age. She was youthful. The Hebrew word actually means insignificant. She was an insignificant nobody. She's still a nobody, a nameless slave. But the God who delights in using worms to thresh mountains delights to take the unimportant, the marginalized, the ignored, the poor to accomplish great things for him. This girl, like Joseph, was sold as a slave to the enemies of Israel. This was more frightening and far more dangerous for a girl than a fellow. She had no rights. She was despised property. She could not hope for justice. But like Joseph, whose story she had heard from her mother's knee, she determined to be faithful to the God of heaven. As a teenager, she would have been born about the time of the revival of primitive godliness among the remnant in Israel, following the showdown on Carmel of Prophet Elijah. Her parents may have been in the crowd that saw the fire of heaven flash on the altar and consume it. The message God sent through the prophet Elijah was not in vain. It produced a young person that God could trust on an important but dangerous mission to Syria. Naaman and his wife observed this slave who lived her religion. Instead of being filled with bitterness and hatred, she cared for the people she served. She worked hard. She was uncomplaining, and the beauty of holiness shone through her life. I wonder if I need to be closer. It's just not touching it. Lost it. You know, I wish I was Jesus. He didn't need technology. He used the technology that God had, the nature around. But I need technology. And I have no signal here. It's gone. Let me try this. It's on again. Not perfect. While she lived her religion, she also talked about her religion. And she said unto her mistress, Would God, my Lord, were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. Bible holiness is practical holiness founded on faith. And James assures us faith is not simply advising someone to be clothed and fed. It seeks to clothe and feed. It seeks the good of our enemies and prays for them. And Bible holiness is not ashamed of the spirit of prophecy. The captive maid wasn't ashamed of the spirit of prophecy. She didn't hide her belief in the spirit of prophecy, though she could cite no evidence-based, peer-reviewed literature for her statement. With full confidence, she presented the spirit of prophecy as the solution to Naaman's health problem. Naaman did not dismiss this information. He may never have heard it before, may have thought that he had uncovered a carefully guarded secret of Israel. And those words of the Hebrew slave were carried all the way to Ben-Hadad II, the king of Syria. After the king listened to Naaman, he told him, "Go now, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel." Naaman departed in the official government chariot, surrounded by soldiers and attendants guarding both him and payment for his healing he brought with him. It was a several-day journey from Damascus to Samaria and would require food and lodging. In addition, he took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. I checked the spot prices of silver and gold, and as of today, it would be approximately $312,000 of silver and $4.8 million of gold. Naaman was willing to give a fortune for his health, over $5 million. With the letter, with the cash, Naaman set off to Israel, an official ambassador on official business. There was little communication between the warring kings of Syria and Israel. It would be humbling for the king of Syria to ask a favor of Jehoram, king of Israel. It would obligate the Syrians to Israel. So, Ben-Hadad disguised his request in the form of a command. Short and to the point, he wrote, "Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy." It was equally difficult for King Jehoram to receive Naaman. Leprosy was the Ebola virus of Israel. There were strict rules that were rigorously enforced in Israel. There was not only loathing, but fear. The king was being asked to receive this high Syrian official who should not even be within the city walls, let alone in the king's court. The health laws of Moses demanded he wear a mask and social distance. This letter was not asking that the king of Israel himself heal Naaman. It was requesting that the king of Israel open up the resources within his kingdom for healing lepers. Ben-Hadad assumed the king of Israel should know how to do this. He assumed that a king would know what a captive slave would know. But the shameful truth was that King Jehoram, the youngest son of Ahab and Jezebel, knew less about the benefits of the spirit of prophecy than a slave girl. And because he didn't understand God's comprehensive medical missionary evangelism, he couldn't recognize a witnessing opportunity. He should have taken Naaman's eyes off the king of Israel and focused them on the God of Israel, but he failed to do this. When the king of Israel had read the letter, he rent his clothes. Calling his counselors together, he began to talk about his favorite subject, himself. He told them, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man does send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. I, me, poor me." He took the letter seriously, not as an opportunity to help. He couldn't even imagine a real request for help. He took it as a pretext for the next Israel-Syrian war, and he was very upset. It was a big deal when a king tore his expensive clothes. You only tore your clothes in a period of great distress, death, or disaster, and the news spread far and wide. And it was so when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king saying, "Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes?" There was no reason to be upset. Introduce Naaman to the spirit of prophecy. Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. The king granted permission for Naaman to see Elisha. Entering Elisha's address into his GPS, Naaman left the palace for the humble home of Elisha. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. What a contrast between the small, simple dwelling of the prophet and the opulent palace of the defense minister of Syria. There were no visible guards at the home of Elisha's home. Naaman expected to be greeted. He expected a red royal carpet treatment, but there was no red carpet. There was no one waiting expectantly for him. Instead, he clambered out of his chariot, walked to Elisha's door, and knocked. No history was taken, no physical examination, no biopsy was done to confirm the impression. He wasn't even sent for nerve conduction tests. The important prophet Elisha didn't even come to the door. Instead, Naaman saw Elisha's PA. Sometimes we think that we need to be more important, more credentialed to effectively minister to important people. But in this story, we were reminded again that God often entrusts simple people with important messages for the wealthy. First it was a slave girl, then it was Elisha's assistants that communicated with the high and mighty Naaman. I said Naaman saw Elisha's PA. That's not really true. He saw Elisha's medical assistants who gave him a prescription which read, "Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and a wonderful promise was given him. Thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean." That was it. 10-second encounter, short prescription. But deep and important spiritual lessons were taught in this encounter. God did not simply want to cure Naaman's body. He wanted to cleanse his soul, bringing him holiness of heart. Lepers were excluded from the commonwealth of Israel because they were unclean. They did not have access to its blessings and privileges. Naaman need not remain excluded. He could be clean. Let me again read a quote we saw a few minutes ago. Holiness is the end of all God's dealings with us. But Naaman didn't understand this. He felt insulted. His pride was wounded, and he felt that there had been no respect for him and his position in Syria. You don't just send a medical assistant to care for a VIP. Elisha was not providing Naaman the community standard of care. Besides, dapsone is the drug of choice, not hydrotherapy. Naaman's swift reaction was completely predictable. Naaman was wroth and went away and said, "Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper." Even 3 millennia ago, people had certain ideas in mind for miraculous healings. Healer comes out, prays, puts his hand on the site of the disease. The healing power flows through the healer's hands to the sick. This is what the so-called faith healers have always done. Naaman may have already seen the Syrian Benny Hinn of his day, but he had not been healed. But God uses all sorts of ways to heal people. He may use health education. He might use a poultice of figs. He might use spittle to make an eye paste. He might use herbs or hydrotherapy. He may use sunlight, exercise, and fresh air. He may use diet. He may use surgery. He may use radiation therapy. He may use topical creams or internal pills. He may use injections. He may use the laying on of hands. Or he may choose to heal at his second coming and the resurrection. Don't make Naaman's mistake. Never limit God to how he must heal you or someone else. Twice, the inspired writer mentions Naaman's rage. First the scowl, then his muttering under his breath, and finally his angry outburst. Are not the Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Over the ancient highways, the distance between Samaria and Damascus was about 125 miles. And directly on the route, about a hard day's journey, 43 miles from Samaria, they would cross the Jordan. The servants knew they had some time. They watched as Naaman's anger slowly dissipated. And finding the opportune moment to talk, they respectfully asked, "My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean?" How often people turn from the simple gospel message that cleanses us from sin and brings us holiness. Naaman may have said nothing. Pride was struggling with humility. But when they finally arrived at the Jordan, the scripture states, then went he down and dipped himself 7 times according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. The record doesn't tell us if he saw a little response after each wash, but on the 7th wash, he was clean, with skin as healthy and smooth as his skin as a child. His healed skin was now younger than his liver. The holiness we obtain from heaven's cleansing gives us the trust of a child. And gratitude replaced his anger, and he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. In the presence of all his servants, he confessed his belief in the God of Israel. The God of Israel, the nation he had been seeking to overthrow. He confessed his disbelief in the gods of Syria, the gods he had been worshiping all his life, and the gods whose cause he had been attempting to promote. With conviction he said, "Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel." Then he offered Elisha rich gifts. "Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But the cleansing God offers is free." Jesus cleansing us from sin is without money and without price. And Elisha, without hesitation, instantly replied with the firmness and even the words of Elijah, his former master, "As the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none." You probably remember the expression Elijah used before King Ahab, "As the Lord liveth before whom I stand." Elisha, the servant of Elijah, had taken not just Elijah's words, but his principles to heart. He was a worthy successor to that great prophet. He had lived in the very presence of God. Though Naaman urged, he could not turn Elisha from this refusal. We are told that the self-denials for the good and happiness of those around us will be found to constitute a large share of the life record in heaven. Naaman then asked for something amazing. He asked for the dirt from Israel. How entirely changed he was. The dirt of Israel, mudding the waters of the Jordan, was what he had angrily denounced. Now he requested this same Israeli dirt. He was a new creature. His tastes were changed. What he once loved, he now hated. What he had hated, he now loved. Medical evangelism is such a versatile tool. The entering wedge of medical evangelism is also the reaping tool of the harvest. Naaman now desires to make an altar to the Lord, publicly acknowledging his entire conversion. He told Elisha, "Thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord." Elisha's servant watched this amazing transformation. But instead of seeing souls won for eternity, he saw only dollars lost for time. Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, not out loud, but to himself, "Behold, my master hath spared Naaman this Syrian." I imagine Gehazi almost spit those words out, the hateful words in his mind, "this Syrian." The Syrians under Naaman's command had been robbing and plundering the Israelites, and this was a God-given opportunity to even the score. But, "As the Lord liveth, I will run after him and take somewhat of him." How unlike Elijah and Elisha. He had adopted their words, "as the Lord liveth," but he had rejected their principles. He did not live in the presence of God. He did not say, "As the Lord liveth before whom I stand." The mantle that had passed from Elijah to Elisha could never be passed to Gehazi. Gehazi may have rationalized that Elisha had missed a providential opportunity to further their self-supporting missionary work. Putting his thoughts into action, Gehazi began to run after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" Gehazi was about to learn the truth of the Proverbs. He that is greedy of gain troubleth his own house, but he that hateth gifts shall live. Gehazi replied, "All is well." And then Gehazi began his tale. Professing to be on an errand from Elisha, he said, "My master hath sent me," saying, many people pretend to have the Bible as the basis of their message. They may say they are giving the spirit of prophecy, but bearing as false witness about that as Gehazi. "Behold, even now there be come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. How easy it is to cover our greed with some good purpose. What better purpose than giving to the poor? The poor need to be helped. That's our duty. And we do need to assist with worthy students. It is right and necessary for schools to ask for funds that assist worthy students. But I repeat, how easy it is to cover our greed with some good purpose. Judas did it. Throughout the centuries, helping the poor has been used as a cover for thievery. And people cover their greed with some good purpose because it works. It fools people. It worked with Naaman. His response was everything that Gehazi could have hoped for. He offered to give more than Gehazi had requested. And Naaman said, "Be content. Take 2 talents. Though inwardly delighted, Gehazi affected reluctance as Naaman urged him and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of garments. But then came a problem when Naaman sent 2 of his servants to carry the gift. You know the story. Gehazi thought he solved this problem by sending the servants back and hiding his fraudulently obtained booty. But there was something Gehazi didn't know. When my oldest daughter became a teenager, I realized I needed family time. So I stopped my hospital practice, dropped hospital committees and responsibilities, dropped back my work hours, and began doing independent medical examination for judges. This left my weekends and evenings free for the family. I saw patients with work comp injuries and other personal injuries. Insurance companies and private investigators secretly video about 10% of the patients that I saw. Sometimes I was given the surveillance videos to watch. I'll never forget one video I was given just before examining the patient. I saw the patient on a Tuesday, and the video had been taken on Sunday. It showed the patient working on his house, carrying heavy objects, moving his neck and back freely without any apparent difficulty or pain. The patient was completely unaware that he was being videoed, and he was still unaware of the video when I saw him. When I examined the patient, he came into my office moving very slowly. He wouldn't move his neck. He wouldn't bend his back. I asked him if he had ever done, since his injury, the activities that I had just watched him doing in the video. He said, "Oh, I haven't been able to do them since the injury." Of course, he was lying. I had the video to prove it. Gehazi didn't realize that he had been videoed. He didn't know this was going to be his last day of work. He didn't know that his fraud would ruin his future, his reputation, and his family. He did not guess that the pittance of silver and changes of garment he received would cost him everything of value in his life. Still acting the part, he came in to see Elisha affecting nonchalance. In commenting on Gehazi, we are told it is seldom that one sin will stand alone or be restricted in the range of